Of all the hubbub surrounding this or that choice made by the creators of Avengers Endgame, I heard very little said of a colossal decision that the heroes made in the film. The decision to bring back those lost to the snap, but also to
keep what I found. I have to, at all costs.
They could have reversed time to the point just before the snap and prevented it, thereby alleviating a great deal of the subsequent misery and death. The immense moral significance of the choice they made was never discussed in the movie, and thus it was never really felt by audiences. Tony dictates the terms that Steve must agree to in order to move forward at all, and Steve gives him no resistance. No one ever discusses the possibility of doing more, but were the Avengers right to stop at bringing back the unSnapped? Or should they have used the infinite power of the Infinity Gauntlet to undo all the damage Thanos did? And what does their decision tell us about the ultimate limits of human morality? What exactly was the moral choice the Avengers made? What wrong were they trying to right? The snap, obviously, which directly erased half of all living creatures. The half still remaining were left to deal with the fallout. What fallout? How bad is the world now? In Infinity War, Thanos justified his previous murder of half of Gamora's homeworld by saying that some 25-odd years later,
children born have known nothing but full bellies and clear skies. It's a paradise.
What does the 5-year post-snap Earth look like? We see some vignettes showing a world neither dying nor thriving. It's very much not a paradise. Trash piled up on sidewalks, refugee boats around the Statue of Liberty, the lot at Citi Field is still half full of cars that were never driven off after the last ball game 5 years ago, and kids on bikes don't trust strangers who look like Paul Rudd, which is a goddamn tragedy. But you can apparently still buy fancy cars, magazines about composting exist, and a gilded memorial has been erected to the fallen. Even if the world hasn't completely gone to hell, though, it's clear that the survivors are traumatized. Joe from the group therapy session is going on his first date in 5 years, and both he and his date cry on what should be a happy occasion. The wound is still very much open in the hearts of those left behind. So even if we don't know exactly how the world is doing now, we know that the snap had catastrophic after effects. We saw in the Infinity War post-credit scene that the immediate aftermath included widespread destruction, cars crashing without drivers, pilotless helicopters falling from the sky. The bottom line is that half the universe died, and some more died because of the circumstances in which they found themselves post-snap, and those left behind 5 years later carry intense trauma, as well as a diminished overall quality of life. So, who was impacted by the snap? Who are the categories of people? There are the unsnapped, people who were snapped away. There's some people we're going to call Joes. These are the long-term survivors of the snap. They're just racked by tragedy. Another group we're going to call Mad Maxes. These are people who died due to the impact of the snap. And then we'll have a fourth group called Morgans. These are people who were born after the snap. So, how do you solve the snap? What are the remedies? First of all, you can do just like the Avengers did. You can bring back the unsnapped and just have no other change. You can also prevent the snap, doing a kind of a time rewind. So taking a look at these two options, just bringing back the unsnapped is obviously good for the unsnapped. For Joes, it's not as good as a time rewind because they still have to live through these traumatizing events. For Mad Maxes, obviously, it is also not as good because they die, so we leave them dead. But for Morgans, it's better because Morgans get to be born. On the other hand, if you're preventing the snap, so doing a temporal rewind, still good for the unsnapped. All right, they in this case never get snapped away, but basically equivalent for them. Better for Joes because the Joes don't have to go through the trauma and tragedy. Better for Mad Maxes, they don't die, but not as good for Morgans because they never get born. We know the temporal rewind works because we see Thanos do this when Wanda destroys the Mind Stone. Time proceeds forward for everyone, but backwards for Vision and for the Stone. This would be kind of analogous to that, except that time would proceed backwards for everyone except the wielder of the Infinity Gauntlet. This is going to get around the you can't change the past problem that crops up if they try this via Pym particle time travel. You go back, save the universe, and then you go back to your own time to find that it's exactly the same because the universe you saved is now an alternate dimension. Bottom line, there are a few other possibilities with some slight variations, but we can see that the real conflict between the two major solutions is between the Joes and Mad Maxes versus the Morgans. How much is the pain of the Joes and the death of the Maxes worth against the lives of the Morgans? If there are more people killed because of the after effects of the snap than there are people born since, the math is easy. It's clearly better to do what it takes to bring back the greatest number of people. Based on birth rates, though, it seems unlikely. If we're going to assume that there are more Morgans than there are Maxes, there are more people born since the snap than there are people who died immediately after the snap. And we're also going to assume that Morgans are relatively happy, since they do not have the trauma of the snap and otherwise live in a world that's still reasonably prosperous by the standards of human history. And what we're really asking is, how do we weigh the happy lives of the Morgans against the misery of the Joes? There's the philosophy of utilitarianism. We're looking for the greatest happiness. And in this philosophy, it's a no-brainer. You can undo wild amounts of misery by preventing the trauma of the Joes and the traumatic deaths of the Maxes, so whatever joy the Morgans might contribute must pale by comparison. You have to undo the snap, not just bring people back. Only one person will know that the Morgans existed at all, and so that person's sadness at their loss really can't be weighed against everyone else's. So the utilitarian answer is extremely clear. You have to do the time rewind. Deontology, which is kind of the morality of Steve Rogers, is going to go a little bit different. The categorical imperative behind deontology essentially states that what is right is what would produce the best outcome if everyone did it when faced with that choice. The categorical imperative gets tricky here because unlike the question of should I murder someone, only one person, the wielder of the Infinity Gauntlet, is in a position to take action. To universalize it, we have to imagine something pretty weird. Anyone might come at any time into possession of the Infinity Gauntlet, at which point they will have the option to either use it and erase some people from existence while at the same time undoing a terrible tragedy that has caused untold suffering, or to bring back people killed by that tragedy but not undo the memory or the results. So you can undo 9/11, but at the cost of the entire roster of the NFL. It never happened, we never invaded Iraq or Afghanistan, freedom fries were never a thing, tens of thousands of lives were saved. Or you can just bring back those killed, but the towers stay down, the US is still embroiled in foreign conflict with no end in sight, and the first responders are still getting cancer at unprecedented rates. Or you can undo the Holocaust, but the entire city of Madison, Wisconsin is wiped off the map. The Nazis never came to power and Germany is peacefully reintegrated with Europe. History is completely different, and Milwaukee is the capital of Wisconsin. Or you can just bring back all the people murdered by Nazis exactly as they were a month before they were killed. But that was 75 years ago, and there are now millions of time-displaced Jews suddenly flooding the streets of Europe. The analogy is imperfect, but it's still illustrative. You can fix one of history's greatest wrongs at the cost of your own life, and the lives of some random group of other blameless people. Or you can just leave the wrong in place and restore life with all its attendant chaos.
On your left.
Or you can just do nothing. By the way, using the gauntlet still kills you. Most people probably wouldn't use it, but some would. Even if we say 99.9% of people wouldn't use the gauntlet, there are billions of people in the world. 1/10 of 1% of that still means millions of people who do use the gauntlet to fix things. Knowing that at any moment someone could change the course of your life without you knowing it, or possibly erase you from existence in order to prevent the US slave trade, or to rewrite the Second Amendment to prevent the mass proliferation of guns in the United States and thereby prevent thousands of mass shootings in modern America. Would that be a world you'd want to live in? Alternately, knowing that someone could drop 6 million possibly traumatized and technologically impaired Jews into the European countryside, or that Flight 93 might just land someday. Do you want to live in that world? There are very real practical and emotional implications to bringing back people who were killed. Who takes care of the returned children if their parents died after the snap? How do you reintegrate the returned into a changed society, especially one that has memorialized their deaths?
What?
If one partner was killed and the other remarried, which marriage takes precedence? Does the resurrected spouse have any property rights? If Jeff Bezos was unsnapped, presumably someone else took over his estate. Does he get any or all of it back? What if his fortune was squandered? Does he have any recourse? Regardless of the moral good of undoing a wrong, anything done at this scale creates huge complications that can wreak havoc on the lives of the survivors. You wouldn't be crazy to say that you don't want to live in either sort of world, that the chaos is too much to handle, and that past traumatic events should stay permanent, however tragic. In fact, if it seems likely that given the opportunity, millions of people would bring back the wrongfully killed, or worse, that millions of people would rewrite time in unpredictable ways, that world isn't sustainable. That's a worse outcome than doing nothing. Deontology says that you should act by the maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. You can't universally wish that everyone should bring back the wrongly murdered with a snap of their fingers, because that world in which that happens is utter chaos. Therefore, you shouldn't use the Infinity Gauntlet, period. Now, there are good reasons to question the premise that deontology demands. The Infinity Gauntlet is not a universally available resource. Deontology can tell you that it's wrong to murder someone because anybody can do that at any time. When presented with a unique situation, especially one that has a wide-ranging impact, deontology may simply be unable to address the question. Deontology seeks to find universal principles to guide your actions, but this singular situation begs that entire question. How do you find universal principles out of a situation that is completely unique? To review, if deontology can answer the question in the first place, it says that the Avengers must do nothing at all. Utilitarianism tells us the opposite. We should employ the maximum intervention and reverse time to prevent the snap.
I love you 3,000.
Tony Stark should actively work to erase his daughter from existence. I'm a parent. Let me tell you how much that would never happen. Ever. For any reason. No matter how noble. You could have the trillions of people left in the universe all lined up with their photos of loved ones lost, their tears, their stories of what that person meant to them, and I'd turn them down one by one. I'd be sad about it. Some part of me might even agree that, viewed objectively, the life of my child does not outweigh the lives of trillions of other people. But I just couldn't do otherwise, and you'd be a fool to expect me to. If you've ever been skydiving or used a belay while rock climbing, you understand. You're supposed to just leap out into space, and every logical part of your brain says this is fine. Your body, on the other hand, knows that your brain is full of shit, and it's definitely not going to do that. You freeze, completely in spite of yourself. You can't jump out of the plane. You can't let go of the cliff face. It takes a supreme effort of will to override this innate reaction and let yourself fall out into the void. And that's just your personal survival instinct. I'll tell you a story. The day I became a father, I didn't experience that huge rush of feelings that most people talk about. I had a son now, and I had responsibilities, and he was a cute baby, but I didn't feel this massive sense of love that I expected to. This is apparently not a not totally uncommon situation, by the way. After a day or two of wondering when the dad instinct would kick in and I'd be totally swept up in love with my kid, I started to wonder what was wrong with me. I mean, did I even like this noisy little sleep disruptor? What would I do if a lion wandered into the room? It's a weird thing to ask, I'll grant you, but I remember it clearly. It was a lion in my imagination. And I remember the feeling of icy calm that descended over me. The adrenaline spike. How everything snapped into full clarity.
Tell me, brother, what were you the god of again?
I was just imagining a predator coming after my son, and I was ready to do fucking battle. And let me tell you, that lion had better bring his A game, because I assure you I would have choked it out with my own intestines if it came down to it. That imaginary lion didn't know who was messing with him. So that's how I knew I loved my kid. I'm not saying that every parent is a perfect guardian or that things don't go haywire between parents and children. I'm not claiming to know anything about the biochemical reactions in the brain, about attachment theory, or about any of the underlying reasons why it's so. But I know, if you come for my kids, it's gonna get ugly.
A little bit harsh. And do you know what that makes you? Just like everyone else.
I'm not supposed to be like everyone else, am I?
Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are.
This bit of dialogue is the midpoint of the movie, practically down to the second. K.M. Weiland refers to the midpoint of a story as the moment of truth, enabling the characters to shift from a reactive role.
I'm not afraid to hit an old man. Put on the suit.
Oh my god.
Put on the suit.
Yep.
To an active one.
Guys,
Call it, Captain.
All right, listen up. Until we can close that portal, our priority is containment.
Certainly for Thor, it's transformational advice, giving him the courage to face his fear and ask whether he is still worthy. But I think it's also instructive here as we consider the choice that the Avengers made. Listen to what Tony says when he sets the terms of his assistance.
I gotta tell you my priorities. Bring back what we lost, I hope, yes. Keep what I found, have to, at all costs.
He's crystal clear when he reiterates to Bruce before the glove goes on.
Okay, remember, everyone Thanos snapped away 5 years ago. We're just bringing them back to now, today. Don't change anything from the last 5 years.
Tony isn't being who he's supposed to be. You can't tell me that he hasn't considered other options, like bringing Morgan back in time 5 years and doing a time rewind that leaves his and Pepper's memories intact. This is the freaking Infinity Gauntlet. All things are possible, and Tony is probably the smartest guy on the planet. Tony could have thought through all of the ethical stuff I've been through in this video in about 2 seconds. And let me just tell you, the deontology section has been through like 3 major revisions, each with different conclusions, because this shit is hard. Tony's the one who wanted to put
a suit of armor around the world.
who's always done what he thought was right, even if he had to compromise to bring about the greatest good.
Give me a break!
Tony was supposed to save the world. But that's not who Tony is. Not anymore. Tony's a parent. And now there's someone out there, who matters more than everyone else in the universe. There are too many variables to try anything fancy, too many ways it goes wrong. He's not in control. What if Bruce messes up somehow? Tony's demand here is for risk mitigation. It's the only acceptable strategy. His kid has to come out alive at the end of this at all costs. And I gotta tell you, I can't question that. I spent a lot of time thinking about this decision, and most of me thinks that the utilitarian answer is the right one. Deontology is no help, and I can't really fault the utilitarian logic here. Morgan's gotta go. Sacrifice for a better world for those who remain. Rewind time 5 years, and it's not like anyone's even been killed. These people never existed in the first place. The only one who remembers them is the wielder of the gauntlet. That's the only answer that fixes the misery and terror and death and horror of Thanos' snap. It's what utilitarian morality tells us to do, and deontology forces us to engage with questionable assumptions in an effort to come up with an answer. I think the time rewind is the right answer. But it's not the human answer. Tony's been a utilitarian ever since the Russos got their hands on it. It's the morality he believes in, but you can't ask Tony to give up his kid. You just can't. That's a Thanos thing to do. And that's where I think that this movie really digs deep into some interesting stuff, because I think it presents a situation where abstract ethics demand one outcome, but the human part of us can't do it. I think we've reached the limit of human morality. Think about a cat going after a bird. It's a house cat, it isn't hungry, but it stalks and kills the bird anyway. It's acting on instinct, and it does what comes naturally. Domestic cats actually slaughter vast amounts of wild animals every year for no reason related to their own survival. Cats just like killing things. But are cats evil for doing that? If it were a human adult, sure, definitely. That's a sick and wrong thing to do, and there are laws against it. But if it's a 3-year-old, what do we say then? Does little Morgan Stark understand the nuances of life and death? If she steps on a bird to see what happens, is she a dangerous psychotic? How about a cat? Does a cat understand right and wrong, or does it just understand what its instinct is telling it to do? The answer is, of course, that the cat doesn't understand morality, and neither does Morgan. Or if she gets the morality, she doesn't understand the situation well enough to be expected to evaluate it. 3-year-olds don't grok death's finality.
You know, your dad liked cheeseburgers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get you all the cheeseburgers you want.
Okay.
Human adults also have instincts. We may understand right and wrong, but that doesn't mean we aren't still meat sacks. Just like it takes an effort of will to throw yourself out of an airplane despite all logic telling you it's fine, there are certain moral situations that exist that also butt up against innate human biological coding. Killing your kids is one of those things. Maybe it's the morally correct thing to do, but that doesn't mean that you can actually snap your finger and do it. Just like a cat, you've got instincts to follow. I think that what the Avengers did in Endgame was not the morally correct thing to do, but I also think it's the only human thing to do. I also think we should be intensely, wildly critical of this conclusion. I'm not able to find the fault in my own logic, and there's a real danger to saying that people are not morally responsible for their actions when they reach some nebulous human limit of morality. Saying we're too emotional to be moral can paper over all manner of sin. But I don't think it's controversial to say that, much like biology limits a cat's moral actions, it may also limit a human's. We think of ourselves as beings of logic, but anyone who studies the psychology of advertising knows that's not true. We're driven by emotion and find reasons to justify our decisions. But what about when we know that our choice isn't rational, but we just can't bring ourselves to do otherwise? We just can't make ourselves jump out of the metaphorical airplane, even though we know that's what we should do. If a person has a split second to catch a child who's about to fall off a building, but is terrified of heights and hesitates, is that the same as just deciding to let the kid fall? Of course not. We accept that emotions are part of our decision-making process, even if we're not entirely sure how much of a role they should play. As I've discussed elsewhere, even Captain America can't live up to his own moral convictions all the time. Love is like that, whether it's for a brother or for a daughter. It takes a hard heart and a harder will to ignore it. That's what it would have required to do the right thing in Endgame, according to abstract moral philosophy. A will of iron and a near religious belief in one's own moral rectitude. But we already saw where that can lead us.
Stark tell you anything else?
That you're wrong, you think you're right, it makes you dangerous.
Beware of certainty that you're right. But don't be afraid to explore your own limitations. They are, after all, a part of who you are. Sometimes you can transcend them like Tony does of his limited, selfish outlook on life. But sometimes they reveal who you really are.
The truth is, I am Iron Man.
Whew. Okay, so that video took like a month longer to do than I wanted, and I am very grateful to you if you've made it this far. I sincerely hope that you found something thought-provoking, that, maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't, but at least you've, started thinking about something in a different way. If you don't agree with my ideas, great. I would love to hear about that, because to be perfectly frank, I think we get into some sketchy and potentially dangerous territory, and I'm curious if anybody can help me resolve this. But yeah, I'm glad to finally have this out in the world, and I'm pretty much contractually obliged by the YouTube terms of service to tell you that there's a like and subscribe button somewhere, and use those things. But really, more importantly, if you've got something to say, man, I love comments. I've had such great discussions with people who've watched my videos, and I have learned a lot from you guys. The Thor bits, like the central thesis for this video actually came about in a discussion I had with somebody on YouTube. So I really appreciate it. If you got something to say, let me know. And I do hope to be posting a lot more regularly going forward. I'm going to try to stick to around once a month. As you know, I'm a dad and I've got full-time job, and it's real hard, but I am going to try to be a little more regular on this channel. And yeah, thank you so much again, and hope to see you around soon. Peace.